Right around 3:47 in the afternoon, the wind started talking. Rather than squawking or groaning, Victor Hale's boots picked up a low grinding sound that seemed to emanate from the frozen ground. It was the first time anyone in the Blue Ridge community had ever heard wind talk. The next thing anyone could hear was the piercing cry of tornado. Despite the fact that the mountain air should have been far too chilly for such a creature to survive, a tornado struck in December. But there it was, a dark, swirling column that descended from clouds the shade of new bruises, touching down 3 miles west of them and hurtling toward them at an unfathomable pace. Vigoto bolted for his spherical dwelling. Following his lead, his neighbors dispersed as they made their way to their square homes, those mundane cabins with their crisp corners, flat walls, and peaked roofs that had always provided a sense of security, up until this moment. Those cabins would be reduced to shattered firewood 60 seconds from now. Just 4 months before, in September of 1894, "He's building a barrel," Samuel Crawford said loudly at the trade station, making sure everyone heard. He didn't much care whether Victor heard or not. "Not a barrel," Jacob Hendris clarified, staring across the clearing at the curious contraption. "Barrels have flat ends. That thing's spherical all the way through, like a silo standing on its side." "A silo with a door," Crawford sneered. "The boy's building himself grain storage and planning to live in it." The men laughed. Even Father Williams, who normally stood above such things, allowed a faint smile to slip. Everyone knew Victor Hale had been different after his parents passed. Too much time alone, nose buried in books without pictures, doodling shapes that resisted edges. But this, raising a round home in a valley where every building for generations had been square, was something utterly different. Victor heard the laughs. He kept bending logs. Bending was the hardest part. Square cabins employed straight logs because straight logs were simple. Cut, stack, notch the corners, done. But round walls demanded curved timber, and curved timber demanded steam, patience, and an understanding of wood grain most builders never troubled themselves to master. Victor had spent 3 weeks creating his steam box alone, a lengthy wooden chamber where green logs could be bathed and heated until malleable, then coaxed around a circular form until they cooled and locked into their new shape. One fall afternoon, his neighbor Thomas Reed saw him wrestle another heated log into place. Reed wasn't mocking, he was honestly curious, which made him uncommon among the males. "Why all this trouble?" Reed asked. "Straight walls have worked fine for everyone." Victor wiped sweat from his brow despite the chill. "Ever watch water flow around a river stone? Sure. It doesn't stop, doesn't pile up, just slips past. Smooth, easy." He patted the newly secured log. "Wind does the same. Hits a flat wall square on, pushes hard, and tries to shove the whole building over. Hits a spherical wall," he shrugged. "Nothing to grab, nothing to press against. It just flows by." Reed glanced at the clear sky. "We don't get winds strong enough up here to knock down a proper cabin." "Not yet," Victor responded gently. Reed laughed and went off, but something in the young man's tone made him turn back once more at the empty blue above. By October, the cabin stood half-finished, and the settlement had turned describing it into a sport. The drum, the cheese wheel, the pregnant silo. The gentlest name came from old Martha Briggs, who had lived long enough to remember things others had forgotten. "Looks like the round houses my grandmother told me about," she said one peaceful afternoon when harvest kept the others away. She circled the rising walls 3 times, dragging wrinkled fingertips over the curving timbers, nodding as though confirming an old suspicion. Back in Ireland, before she crossed the ocean, said they constructed them round so fairies couldn't hide in corners. She grinned at the childhood recollection, then got solemn. "That's what she told the children anyway." I think the real explanation was simpler. "What was it?" "Same reason you're building yours." She tapped the wall. "Round things last. Square things break." Victor showed her the engineering diagrams acquired from his grandfather, pages dense with calculations of how force spreads across curved surfaces compared to flat ones. Martha couldn't read the numbers, but she understood the sketches fine. "That's exactly what grandmother described," she muttered. "Wind strikes a flat wall like a fist. Strikes a circular wall," she sought for the term, "like water against a river stone. No punch landed, just flow." "The books call it laminar flow," Victor offered with a small smile. "The old people just called it common sense." Martha laughed. a dry, papery sound that held years of quiet wisdom. Common sense isn't common, boy. When everyone's been doing something wrong long enough, they forget there ever was another way. She visited 3 more times before the snow fell, watching the bent walls rise higher, asking sharp questions that proved she understood building better than most of the men who mocked it. On her final visit, she pressed a small iron charm into his hand, shaped like a perfect circle. "My grandmother's," she said, "for luck. Though I think you won't need luck. You've got something better." "What's that?" "Geometry." The round door was the last great task. Square doors were easy. Straight cuts, right angles, hinges fixed to flat surfaces. A round door required perfectly curved edges, a frame that bent without cracking, and hinges that allowed smooth motion along a curving path. Victor failed 4 times before the 5th effort finally worked. 2 full weeks spent on one door. Why round? Thomas Reed asked the day Victor hung it at last. "I understand the walls, wind resistance, but a round door? What's the point?" Victor swung the heavy door open and closed, watching the seamless action. Consistency. A square door in a round wall makes a weak spot. The corners of the frame interrupt the curve and focus stress. He shrugged. In ordinary weather it probably wouldn't matter. But if you're building for the worst weather possible, you don't leave weak points. Reed shook his head, half amused, half uncomfortable. "You're preparing for weather that doesn't happen here." "Not yet," Victor said quietly. The 2 words became his quiet refrain around the town. Whenever someone scoffed that his efforts were excessive, that his round cabin fixed a problem no one had, Victor simply answered, "Not yet," and returned to work. The phrase irritated some, unsettled others, and lodged in every mind, waiting calmly for the day not yet would become now. November brought the first snow and the settlement's first real test of resilience. Winter preparation in the Blue Ridge was no small matter. Wood to split and stack, food to store, every gap in every wall to be sealed against the coming freeze. Everyone labored from dawn until dark, driven by the shared knowledge that life depended on it. Everyone except Victor, who was still steaming logs and bending curves while his woodpile stood only half complete and his stores remained unfinished. "He'll freeze," Crawford declared loudly at the trading post. "That round thing of his. How's he supposed to heat it? No corners to trap warmth, no flat wall for a good fireplace. Heat will just spin round and round till it shoots out the roof. He doesn't even have a chimney yet," Hendris added. "Just a hole in that pointed top. He'll freeze twice as fast." What they didn't know, what Victor never thought to explain, was that the round shape was actually better for heat. No corners meant no cold areas where chill could pool. The curved walls encouraged gentle circulation that spread warmth evenly, and the center fire pit directly beneath the roof peak radiated heat outward in perfect balance. By December 1st, Victor's shack held a steady 65 degrees while burning half the wood his neighbors fed their hearths. He kept that fact to himself. He had learned that explaining things to people who had already decided you were stupid only hardened their certainty. December 14th, 1894. The morning started wrong. Victor felt it before he could name it, a pressure behind his ears, a weight in the air unrelated to the heavy clouds. The forest had gone silent. No squirrel chatter, no creaking trees, no distant knock of woodpeckers. The world was holding its breath. He stepped outside his round house and looked up. The clouds had arranged themselves in long, strange parallel streaks from horizon to horizon, as though giant fingers had raked the sky. The light filtering through carried a sickly greenish tint that turned the snow the color of old wounds. His grandfather's books had described weather like this. Chapter 14. Atmospheric conditions approaching severe rotational storms. Victor had read the chapter many times, but reading about green light was nothing like seeing it stain the world in colors that should not exist. At the trading post, the older guys felt it too. "Feels like storm weather," Crawford muttered, though the sky held no regular storm clouds. "Wrong color for snow," Hendris said, staring west where the horizon glowed greenish yellow. Father Williams closed the Bible he had been reading by the window and joined them at the door. My grandfather told of a storm in Tennessee, 1830, I think. Sky turned that color right before it struck. Before what struck? The priest gave no answer. He was already rushing toward the church, moving faster than anyone had ever seen him go. At 3:47 p.m., the storm touched down. Later, the survivors would argue endlessly about the tornado's color. Some insisted it was pitch black. Others swore it glowed green or gray or carried the hue of absolute nothingness. What no one disputed was its size. A roaring column 300 yards wide, thundering across the frozen December landscape like every locomotive in the world arriving at once. December tornadoes were supposed to be impossible in the Blue Ridge. The cold air, the rugged terrain, and the atmospheric science that would one day explain why such storms had never been recorded here before. The tornado paid no attention to science. It cut a merciless path straight through the heart of the settlement. Victor was 200 yards from his cabin when he saw it bearing down. He ran, not toward the closer trading post, not toward the sturdier church, but toward the round cabin everyone had ridiculed. Deep in his gut, he knew it was the only structure with any chance of surviving what was coming. Behind him, the world unraveled. Crawford's proud 40-year-old cabin lifted clean off its foundation as though a giant hand had plucked it upward. Logs burst apart in mid-air, spinning outward like the spokes of a shattered wheel, scattering across a quarter-mile of forest. Hendriss's barn simply exploded. One instant a barn, the next 1,000 fragments hurtling in every direction at 60 miles an hour. The trading post, the church, the mill house. Victor caught them all in the corner of his eye as he sprinted. Walls peeling away like wet paper, roofs lifting and sailing, every straight, square, ordinary building catching the wind like a sail and tearing itself to pieces. He reached the round door and threw himself inside. The noise defied description. Victor pressed his back against the curved inner wall, hands clamped over his ears, eyes shut tight, while the tornado tried its hardest to kill him. The wind screamed around the circular walls. He could hear it sliding past, furious, finding no corner to hook, no flat face to shove against. His grandfather's books had explained this. How wind pressure spread evenly across a curved surface instead of hammering concentrated force against flat walls, and how corners bred destructive turbulence while curves encouraged laminar flow that bled the energy away. It had all been theory. Now Victor was living inside the theory. And the theory was holding. The cabin shuddered violently. The round door rattled in its frame. Sparks scattered from the central fire pit. But the walls held. The roof held. The impossible, impractical, pointless curved logs held. 47 seconds. That was how long the tornado spent directly overhead. 47 seconds of sound that would haunt his dreams for decades. Then came silence. Victor opened his eyes, uncovered his ears, and rose on trembling legs. He stepped to the round door and looked out. The sight would stay with him forever. The tornado had scoured a 300-yard-wide swath through the settlement. Everything in that path was simply gone. Not broken, not damaged, gone. The ground itself lay scraped bare, as if a colossal blade had shaved the earth clean. Crawford's cabin gone. Hendriss's barn gone. The trading post, the church, the mill house gone. 12 structures had stood in the tornado's direct path. 11 no longer existed. The 12th was a round cabin with a round door, standing untouched amid utter devastation. Survivors emerged slowly. Not everyone had died. Some had been outside the direct path. Others had found refuge in root cellars or creek beds. But every soul caught inside a square building was either dead or gravely injured. Every single one. Crawford was alive. He had been in his privy, far enough from the center to survive as a tilted wreck rather than scattered splinters. He stumbled toward Victor's cabin in a daze, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead, staring at the curved walls as though seeing them for the first time. How? His voice was barely a whisper. How is it still standing? Victor didn't answer at once. He was staring at the wreckage around them. The lives destroyed, the town shattered in minutes. It hardly felt like the moment for lectures, yet Crawford deserved the truth. "Corners," Victor said finally. "Wind hits a corner, and the force multiplies, concentrates on one narrow point until something gives. Here." He rested a palm on the smooth, curved wall beside him. "There are no corners. The wind couldn't find anything to grab, anything to push against. It just slid around and kept going." Crawford reached out gently, touching the wall as though checking whether it was genuine. 40 years, he muttered. "For 40 concentrating years I've been building square cabins, telling everyone that's the only proper way, and laughing at anyone who dared to be different." His voice cracked. "I knew enough to laugh. I knew enough to stand at the trade post calling you a fool while you constructed the only thing that could survive this." More survivors drifted into the round cabin as daylight faded. They came seeking shelter. Victor's was the only intact building for half a mile. But they lingered because they could not quit watching. They walked the circuit again and again, tracing fingers over the curved planks, trying to fathom how something so unusual had become the lone thing left standing. Father Williams came at dusk, hobbling painfully from wounds incurred when the church collapsed. He had survived only because he'd reached the root cellar beneath the altar. "The old people knew," he remarked, staring at the cabin with silent reverence. "My grandmother's grandmother spoke of round buildings, said they were sacred, that God lived in circles, not squares." He shook his head. "I thought it was superstition." "It's geometry," Victor responded gently. "Maybe those are the same thing." That night, 23 survivors squeezed inside the round cabin designed for one. They pressed close together, warmed by the central fire that diffused heat equally in every direction because no chilly corners existed to capture the coldness. Outside, the temperature fell to 15 below zero. Inside, it never dipped below 55. Rebuilding began in spring. Not everyone welcomed the round design. Some stuck steadfastly to a lifetime of square habits, even after watching them fail so completely. But plenty did. Enough glanced at the worn route where their homes had vanished and chose different over dead. Crawford, who had mocked the loudest, became Victor's first and most loyal student. He learned to steam wood, bend curves, and build walls without corners. His new cabin took 3 times longer than a square one would have. "Worth every extra hour," he exclaimed the day it was finished. The task grew into a community ritual. People who had never built anything more sophisticated than a fence flocked to see Victor and Crawford, examining the steam boxes, the bending frames, and the meticulous coaxing of straight timber into lovely arcs. Some came to help, others to study, and a few merely to witness proof that what they had witnessed during the tornado was real, that circular walls truly withstood what square walls could not. Old Martha Briggs came regularly, seated in a chair Crawford constructed expressly for her, observing with eyes that carried a century of memories. "My grandmother would have loved this," she observed one afternoon as steam rose gently from the box. "She always claimed the old ways would return, that new ways were only fashion, and fashion fades." "The old ways came back because 11 people died in square buildings," Victor stated, not rudely, merely truly. Martha's voice kept calm. "The old ways always return for the same reason. People forget and then they recall. Forgetting costs lives. Remembering saves them." She paused. "Your grandfather's books are remembered for him. Most folk don't have books. They have graves." By summer 4 spherical cottages stood in the settlement. By the following year 11. Word traveled to nearby valleys, carried by survivors who had observed the impossible. A cyclone that wiped everything but the structure everyone had derided. Thomas Reed built the 3rd round cabin, smaller than Victor's but exactly proportioned, complete with a round door on hinges he forged himself. "I kept thinking about what you said," Reed told Victor the day he moved in. "About building for weather. That doesn't happen here." He rested a palm on his new curving wall with quiet pride. "You weren't wrong. That weather didn't happen here. Until it did. Now I build for weather that hasn't happened yet. Because yet is always waiting." I had training, Victor softly clarified. Just not the kind you know. My grandfather's books were with me. I had stories from my granny. Martha Briggs told me about round dwellings in ancient Ireland. He gave a shrug. Different types of education, but education in general. That was also jotted down by the lecturer. Victor's intuition and inherited knowledge would later be confirmed by modern structural engineers. A circular building can withstand about 40% less wind load than a rectangular one of the same size. Curved walls distribute force uniformly throughout their entire surface, whereas flat walls dangerously concentrated at corners. The lack of edges eliminates turbulence, which can triple or quadruple destructive power. However, it took years for the engineers to show up. The first was a 19-year-old who had spent his entire life watching rivers flow smoothly over stones and had heard that wind acted like water, so he bent logs into sweeping arcs. 11 people in the Blue Ridge neighborhood perished in the December 1894 tornado. It caused scars that took years to heal and destroyed 23 buildings. However, it also created a legacy of spherical structures that would protect hundreds, if not thousands, of lives in the coming century. Every curved wall turned into a subtly remembered lesson. Each circular cabin served as a mournful reminder of the people that were lost within square ones. Up until his death in 1952 at the age of 78, Victor Hale resided in his original round cabin. By that time, he had constructed 37 circular structures in 4 states, trained over 100 apprentices in the art of curved construction, and gained quiet recognition as the best wind-resistant builder in the Appalachian region. His initial cabin is still standing today. The walls still have the same unbroken curves that endured a tornado in December and more than a century of mountain storms. Even though the logs have turned silver with age, the roof has been renovated twice, and the circular door has been restored 3 times. Sometimes guests ask the present owners why the cabin is round. Because corners catch the wind, and wind, given something to catch, will eventually win, is typically the straightforward answer. There is a longer answer, though, for those who are prepared to stay. It tells the tale of a young man who studied his grandfather's lost books, about neighbors who made fun of what they did not comprehend, and about a winter afternoon when the sky turned a sickening green and the impossible roared down from the clouds. About a solitary round door that led to survival while every square door only led to destruction, and about 47 terrifying seconds that altered everything. Bends are remembered by the wind. We also do. That was the whole tale. Please hit the bell icon and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it so you don't miss any more.